focused on here.
My apologies.
Yeah.
That's on our agenda. To the meeting available via Zoom. Be a good slideshow.
Sure.
Or the slideshow.
Yep, you got it.
Okay, there's.
Oh, I'm going to send you the Zoom invite. Are people able to view it on YouTube though, right?
Yeah, they
Okay.
can watch it on YouTube, but when they click on Zoom does they can go there.
Okay.
Here, click it. You know, it's very challenging. The header has to be changed in this agenda and it require multiple days notice to update it. So our staff can't change it directly.
So you should have a calendar invite in your box so you can view.
That's what I'm saying. I'm not sure. That's not on. No worries. So, and the idea behind these success metrics, of course, is that they're going to provide us, staff, clear expectations and help as we work through this process, right? Always reflecting back and making sure that that's what we're measuring against. So these are going to be measurable indicators used to determine whether our objectives have been achieved. Again, providing clear expectations to guide our progress. So this is what we're going to put in front of you as a suggestion to start, right? We want them to be high enough, to be broad enough to guide us down the path, but specific enough to be measured, right? So there's a balance there, recognizing that we may have some bullets under these to better define what those criteria are. So the first, looking at, we want to fill the available housing units, right? At this point, we don't talk about ratio, right? But we want to make sure, I know we've heard the board say many times, like we need to get staff into those units, right? How do we accomplish that? I just put as an example up there, one of those things that's going to drive that is an affordable price point, right? An affordable monthly rent. We also want this project to become self-sufficient, right? We want it to have a cost neutral or positive cash flow on a monthly or annual basis. And then thirdly, we want this board's time more of its time to be spent on the learning matters within the district, right? And less time on workforce housing project, right? So the idea of coming up with a managing entity to oversee that project on a regular basis and then report back to this body periodically, right? At this board's definition. All right, so the last survey was done back in 2018, I think it was. And so we really thought it was important to go back out and survey our staff, right? To get some more current data with updated information that we have. You have a full set of data, the survey data, in a packet in front of you. So do you want one? But here are the higher level takeaways that we kind of culled from that information. First, we had 374 respondents. So that was about 50 to 60% of our employees responded. First, we looked at the current living situation, right? Understanding what their current situation was. 62% of our employees live outside of Mountain View. Majority of them live further out in communities that could be due, we're surmising, due to cheaper rent. Average rent in these areas, you can see the overall average of $2,684, almost $2,700. And this is all living situations, right? Not studios or one bedrooms or two bedrooms. It's generally what our folks are paying. Those in Mountain View are paying just over $2,700. Nearby communities are a little bit more at $2,781. And then the ones further out are clearly the least expensive at just over $2,600. Most of our staff, 42%, currently live in a two bedroom. And 50%, half of the respondents indicated that that's what they would want, right? That's what they would be interested in, is a two bedroom. All right, and then digging in a little bit deeper, fully a third of responding staff, almost a third of responding staff, might be interested in living in staff housing. 17.5% indicated a strong interest. And then looking at why they might not be interested, just looking at the top three reasons, 99% of the respondents, they own a home, right? So those 374, what's that?
99 people.
I'm sorry, 99 people, 90%, thank you, 99 people. So it's a significant portion, right? Between 25 and 30% own their own home. 45 of them already have a stable renting situation. This is what they indicated as why they might not be interested. And 12 indicated that they thought the rent was too high. So moving on. This is looking at a comparison of interest and qualification, right? Who qualifies? And it says there if income limits are raised, right? So this has to do with the AMI. Specifically, we're talking about the 120% AMI. The number of people interested increases from 44 to 67%, right? So fully 2/3. This means an additional 52 people of those who responded to the survey would be interested, right? So that's another 50%. Just of note, I think it's important to point out that we are in conversation with the city of Mountain View right now, right, to look at getting that AMI raised from 120%. We're looking to 150%. It would capture just it would provide an opportunity for a larger number of our staff to be able to qualify to live in this complex. So next, some more detail, and I have on the next slide when I go to it, there's a blown up version of that bar graph at the bottom because I know that the numbers are a bit small. But again, this is something we knew. It's validated with the survey information that rents seem to be the main inhibitor to staff members moving in, right? Rents are too high. Those who responded said they pay an average, just across the three types of dwellings we have, studio, one bedroom, and two bedroom, but an average of $211 more is what they would be willing to pay. That means our current one and two bedroom rents would have to drop about $500 from where they currently are to meet that plus $200 threshold. And then current studio rents would have to drop $900 to meet that threshold, even at an increase of it's $475.
Yes.
Yeah. So looking at it a little more closely. Right. So go back to say again, Blue is what they're paying. Orange is what additionally they'd be willing to pay. And then red is essentially what our rents are at. So red would have to be removed in order for respondents' desires to be met, right? Monthly rent desires. Okay. So questions about the survey information? There's, again, more in the packet, but that's what we pulled out as the high level takeaways for us that really help to drive our work. All right, next we're going to get into just the current state of it's on, I think.
Hi. Peter Ingram, your consultant for this project. Glad to be back, board members. So I'm just going to do a sort of a different take on what Jeff just talked about. And I wanted to put some of the numbers we just saw in those charts into the context of the market. So this chart just puts some of that in a place that helps us understand the relativity of pricing. So the first line in the chart shows what the asking market rent is, according to the comps that have been run for the project. And it breaks it down by studio 1, 2, and then the average of all of them. Second line is the effective market rent, which in the world of rental means whatever concessions an owner might have offered for somebody to move in, that's actually what the rent ends up being compared to the asking. Then we've got the two AMI levels that we know about shown below that. So you can see how prices start to go down depending on the factors. So then if we go back to the survey and you take the average of all those units, you can see what the gap is in a different way. So basically that first column where you see the red 993, that is the apparent gap between the 120 AMI of 2,400 and what your employees said they would be willing to pay. So that in a nutshell just captures what that apparent gap is and starts to inform us of what the range of targeting prices needs to be. And then I just put in for reference, if there's questions, to remind us what the number of units are in each of those types of units. So it breaks it down 120, 80, and then the total unit count. That, I think, is it for that slide. Yes. Questions?
I have a question. So that shows a difference of almost $1,000 between the studio and the one the rest of the employees should be willing to pay. For the survey, there's a pie chart that lays out how, if you rent, how many bedrooms are in the current place. What is the actual number of people who responded that they're in a studio?
Should have numbered the pages, sorry.
What's the page one? Page one, just the middle pie chart. So I'm wondering if that $1,400 is from like 10 people, like how many people responded to that?
Which question? First, second, or third?
So if we look at
Oh, I see.
how many studio renters currently are there who responded,
Right.
and then how many people responded regarding the proposed price of the studio?
It's 7 or 8 people, I think.
The distribution of bedrooms across interested respondents was only 4 for the studio. So I don't want to make $1,000 decision on the 4 people.
Right.
That's all that I'm trying to
Yep.
get.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think it's 7.5 people.
So it's a very, very small sample size. I'll say that. That's just a significant difference. Yeah. Okay.
welcome.
We're good. Yeah.
Oh, more.
Anybody find interesting? I guess folks pay a small premium to go to neighboring communities rather than being closer. It's, Los Altos, Palo Alto or something like that. Because then you get further away, right? People are trading money for community here. They're
Right.
going to adjacent communities but paying more for it.
Well, and I think maybe you can talk about quality a little bit, right? We know that our a number of our, I can't cite numbers here, right? But there was a willingness to pay less money for a lower level property.
Yeah.
Right, because it's the price of it, because it's about the money, right? So I don't know where they're going to, but we do know that a significant portion of our people are just seeking out what they can get for their dollar, right? And it doesn't really matter whether it's a level 1, 2, or 3 property in many cases.
But before you move on to the next subject, looks like you're moving on to something else. I'd like to understand a little bit sort of the idea of attracting younger teachers. So do we, in this data you just showed, do we have any idea existence of a younger population or newer to our district, or have they been in the district for a while? Do we know that?
I don't think we do. No. So we don't. We didn't target with this particular survey. That it's an interesting idea though, right? Because we could identify employees who've been here 5 years or less and survey them in particular.
Yeah, and sort of the next question to this, and this is probably a more important one, is that, I would really like to hear that Kara and the staff have gone out and are interviewing candidates, and they are just thrilled to death that they can move into a teacher housing project. Maybe it's too early to understand that, but do we have any sense?
They went to the hiring fair last weekend, and when Tara and Swati reported out, and Cindy, they said that we had the longest line at the hiring fair and that staff housing was one of the selling points. So they had a banner up and flyers out talking about staff housing. So that was definitely a draw. They had shared that we shut the place down and we still had a line.
So I would encourage you, so we have data that can sort of support our decisions. I encourage the staff to, figure out a way to summarize, what they're trying to do. So that would be great. Because to me, that, getting new teachers into our school district, which is very competitive, would be fantastic. That is, we always pitch this to the public, right? It's attract and retain teachers. So this is like half of our objective.
And I'll say that we have had internal conversations about that very topic, right? How do we take greater control of this property so we can set the price that we want and target exactly what you're saying, right? So for incoming brand new teachers, perhaps the studio would be more acceptable in that case. And how can we create a situation where we can really name that price, right? And maybe, maybe certain types of units are priced more aggressively than others.
Yes, makes a lot of sense. Another question I have is, how was the decision made originally to on what was the number of units for each category? How was that done? Was there some survey that went out, or how was that decision?
Do we know that? Or should I comment from other places?
Sure.
So I don't. So clarifying, I don't think we know that from here, right? I don't know the answer to that. But Peter's going to answer
Yeah.
Just in, using other projects as a test case.
Yeah, so my experience and my observation of this phenomena is that a lot of times the unit count is driven by either a development partner and or their architects on what's going on in the marketplace. And in Mountain View right now, what we've heard is there's a lot of emphasis on studios and one bedrooms for the younger workforce coming out of school with presumably a school with student debt, or maybe they're living with mom and dad. So that's a pretty strong trend in Mountain View. It's true up and down the peninsula in varying degrees, depending on the jurisdiction. So I don't know the answer either, but I would speculate just looking at the mix that it was driven by, that's what we should be providing. So now, having said that, if I look at where the units landed, it also sort of suggests that somebody said, well, wait a minute, we shouldn't put all our eggs in one basket. So you actually don't have as many studios as I might see in a market rate unit complex. I'm just offering speculation based on what I've seen out there.
I've been reading through one of the recent public records requests with all the communications with Miramar, and it looks hadn't finished. It's 1,500 pages of documents. But in my recollection, that it was in the early conversations between the developer, the city, and is where the unit mix was.
Yeah, because I could say, just reflecting on what you comment on what you just said, was that some BMR housing development for the community, right, is going to be different than the BMR housing development for teachers.
Yeah. Yes.
That. Yeah. Okay, deposit. This is a structured section. I think. Okay, let's jump in. It's a very good question. Maybe we'll get to it later, but kind of, are we going to cover how we are restricted on setting rents should be talk about that now for where the environment really comes into this.
I didn't quite hear. Can you repeat the second half of that?
Around how we're setting rents for the different MR sections and potentially what flexibility we have on broadly.
I think we'll touch on it a little bit later when I talk about the financing piece, but it's a very good question of like, what is our flexibility? There's different pieces that we're working on simultaneously. So one is requesting help from the city to increase the AMI level to 150%. So I think we just talked about that would increase the number of people that are eligible. And then the other piece is right now, the ground lease is in part driving where we set our rents. So the district is not intending to make cash off of this as it is right now. So it's the ground lease, which is driving where our rents are.
The second thing is the different segments that we have, and probably need to consider independent of each other, right? Because I think once you stop qualifying for that segment, you have to stop qualifying for that unit, and then you'll end up on a waiting list for that unit, and you won't come in or you have to, right? So I think we probably need to think through the life cycle of the person using on there and what that's going to look like, how we do that.
Yep. Yeah, we just expanding a little bit on what Rebecca had said. It is the land cost that's really driving this. The operating expenses are going to be the operating expenses right? So and we know those come in at 1.3 million or so a year. It's the land that's really forcing the price in order to hit a break-even level for the property.
most of this is a review that we've talked through at a previous board meeting, but this is an illustrative purpose of what a $20 million COP. So a COP is a certificate of participation, is a loan for a school district. So if the school district were to take out a $20 million COP, so we're still in negotiations for the price of the land. This is just illustrative purposes. I know it's really small, but the debt service is what the district would be paying back yearly. So it starts out at a little under $1 million for several years and then goes out in the out years. So what we were talking about earlier is about the ground lease, which is driving the rents. This is about half of, a little less, about half of what we're paying right now for the ground lease. So
In the early years.
in the early years. So looking at with a $1 million repayment, rents could be lowered up to an average of $11,000, $562 per unit. And the board could choose to lower the rents approximately $963 a month on average across all the unit types, to lower the rents or split it and say we want half of it to go back into some type of building fund, or you choose to lower the rents to the lowest level. If we continue to lease the land, the rents would need to stay up the same.
I did locate, looks like on October. And this is the interesting thing about learning about things that happen on your, before you were on the board through the public records request. There was a study session by City Council on the 7th project on October 23rd, 2018. And by that time, the school district and the developer had to be able to spec out and document how the ground lease would be paid for. And so it looks like, yeah, in that study session, they had the affordable housing units planned out, and it's also tied into the parking that was developed for development as well.
Hey,
Mentioned. If we pay the ground lease, it's a situation of the park and all the amenities and everything else that go along with this complex.
Sure, great question. So if the district chooses to purchase the land, the amenities, the parking, all of that would continue in perpetuity. So that would be part of the agreement with MVO.
Purchase of the house.
Right.
so we'd like to share a little bit of learning from the project in Daly City, the Jefferson Union High School District. They and I just sort of teased out some highlights from field trip we did last week. Got a tour of the whole facility by one of the trustees who's been involved from the beginning. So for tonight, I thought these would be the most important points to just get in front of the board, and I've got a lot of additional details if you have questions. But I think I would start by saying, so this month, they're 3 years occupied. And the first thing you'll hear a trustee from their district say when they're talking about it is, for 3 years, we have not had a single teacher vacancy on the first day of school, which for them in their circumstance apparently was a huge challenge in the years that preceded that. So they have a very similar need for affordability with their staff, and they emphasize that in their view, the housing is for staff broadly because janitors and teachers' aides and kitchen help, they all contribute to the educational experience, and they're all important. So they really took that as one of their guiding principles essentially from day one. They have very different circumstances, though. They owned a large empty school site, basically an empty field. I mean, it feels capacious to me. There's surface parking and buildings way over there. It's quite different than the urban setting that we're all in. They also took a different approach with their COPs, where they financed part of the project with a general obligation bond and part was COP, so they had a different mix. And I think the other thing that struck me as just fundamentally different is that they started, and this finding goes back, I think they've been at it for 10 years. Seems like they had 7 years of planning and construction, now 3 years of occupancy. And way back to when they started the conversation, they had done enough survey of their employees and enough research on the market to know that to get theirs to be successful, they would have to have a solid goal of rents being 50% of the market. And when they defined the market, they didn't just stop within the Daly City boundaries. They really threw a wide net for the reason that we just discussed, which is employees tend to live much further away. So those fundamentals have been in place to drive the project forward. And the second bullet sort of is the testimonial that not only is the building full, but there's 30 to 40 on the waiting list at any given time. They've actually had to close the waiting list because there's just so much interest. And I asked the trustee, I said, so does that present a sort of an organizational problem for you? Like, does it feel bad that you have to say you don't have room? And he said that the staff and the teachers had just come to the conclusion that that's okay because it's working and it's accomplishing the goals that we set out to accomplish. So again, their financing plan gives them the ability to turn the dials on rents as long as they have that bright red line between the general fund and their educational pursuits and the housing. I think the most important takeaway for me that I've been sort of building on in the work I've been doing with other districts is that they were one of the early organizations that got out in front and established a 501c3. And that's been in place since 2020. So it actually came into being before construction was finished to give them plenty of ramp up time, plenty of time to anticipate the zone we're in now, which is that very difficult sort of getting occupancy the first time and stabilizing the building. And that added to their intellectual capacity because they were able to draw expertise from their community to be on the board of that corporation and to help inform decision-making and choices. So they're sort of like still the gold standard for how you very deliberately and thoughtfully plan and execute over a long period of time. And, we all know that, examples are great, but every circumstance is different. So I'm here tonight to say that there's plenty of good things that we can still capitalize on from their example and the information that they're providing. And, now that they're operational for 3 years, they have a board who, when asked, said, what do you spend your time in your board meetings? They say, we talk about kids and education. Well, what if there's a problem in the building? Well, that goes to the board of our housing corporation. Our CBO serves as the treasurer, sort of oversight capacity, and they actually have a staff position that is assigned. Part of their job is to be the coordinator of that whole thing. So there's a direct connection back into the organization. And I love the way it's characterized is that person is the humanizing face for employees as they're considering whether they should move or not. And when we asked them about, well, isn't that a burden on your general fund? And they said, well, we chose to pay it from our educational general fund, but there's no reason if you had your operating expenses set up properly that you could pay it from the building. And as far as they knew from the research they had done, that would be acceptable. So it was just a good reminder that the journey you're on, that there is success out there, and I'm happy to answer questions of other things that I learned. To your point, Trustee, they told us that they set aside 5 units every year for new hires when they're out recruiting, so they can sort of say, we've got that ready to go. And they also reserve 5 units if in the event they have to bring teachers in from somewhere else. But that tends to have sort of gone away as they've rolled into more local hiring. I think that's it on the highlights. I'll just stop there.
Question. What are they doing about setting up a reserve fund?
Good question. My understanding, and I need to circle back to get an exact number, but I understand they have an operating reserve. I can't remember the exact number where it is now, but it is in existence. It is fairly substantial. And that was a follow-up question that they haven't responded to yet. But we can certainly find out. And there's some rules of thumb in the rental world, both from nonprofit, affordable housing developers, which we're also talking to, as well as commercial developers, where we can bring you sort of the range of what those ought to be and what the criteria is for setting that, especially with the new building.
Yeah, it makes sense. There's probably some rule of thumb.
Yeah.
Sort of asset, real estate asset.
Yeah.
Looking to in 2020. Now, 5 years later, they fully stopped with the waiting list on it. Do you know what the kind of timeframe was?
So the corporation came into being in 2020. The building opened 2022. So we're just at 3 years. And they basically talked about that 1 year of stabilization, which is the rule of thumb that I've heard most often is your first year of occupancy, when you hand your first set of keys to an employee, you need a year for that whole situation to stabilize if everything comes together. So the planning ought to be a 1 year increment, a budget year or a calendar year, whatever.
I haven't gotten a chance to connect with other since I was at the CSBA Board of Directors meeting this weekend in Sacramento after our special meeting here. And I talked to staff there who so Greg Francis is running the CSBA workforce housing work. And so they're more than happy to jump on the phone and talk with us and support us in any way. I can send an introductory email to maybe Peter and Jeff as well and Rebecca, just to get the ball rolling. And they have business affiliates who they've curated a list of business affiliates who are doing work in this space specifically with teacher workforce housing, and they gave me some recommendations of people who might be willing just to talk to us kind of without charging a fee, but just kind of to inform us about what they've done or what they've been doing. So, there's a huge effort to really kind of dive into this statewide, and they've been leading that charge, and they want to see us succeed, right? They also suggested one of the researchers that they've been working with that we could reach out to, could possibly present to the board. We want a more academic take on workforce housing and what's been driving this. So I can share all of that.
Okay, great.
I have another question. Is our housing projects very much intertwined with the city's affordable housing definitions? Is that the same for the Jefferson Union? Where I'm coming from, is it the way this was originally set up a long time ago? There seem to be a lot of city requirements that sort of bind our ability to, or constrain our ability to do certain things with this housing project.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm wondering, is this common? Is this unusual? What?
Great question. Yeah. And I'm glad you asked it, because that could have been up there as well. So again, different circumstances. Daly City required the district to allocate 10% of total units as deed restricted. I believe they are broken into 3 categories. So out of 122 units, 12 of them are deed restricted. We asked, so do you screen applicants and treat those units any differently? And they said, we don't have to because it's such a small percentage of the total units. It just solves itself and the units float in the building. They're not, it's not attached to a specific unit. In Redwood City, we're in the planning phase. And in that case, because we're partnered with a commercial developer and the commercial developer is on the hook for EMR contributions for the office, and we're on the hook as a residential developer. So we have to meet their 15%, 20%, excuse me, requirement. And we also came to the conclusion that that is manageable because a lot of those are going to be in the moderate category. And when we scanned across the workforce and the pay scales, the board said, you know, it's a low risk. I don't think that's going to cause us problems. So yeah, yours is, I was surprised how much restriction is here. And it's a solvable challenge, but it is a big challenge.
Yeah, that's a conversation. For another day.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Moving forward.
All right, the next piece that we wanted to just discuss today is rent concessions. So this is something that was discussed at the Staff Housing Oversight Committee, I want to say 2 or 3 weeks ago. A rent concession is often used in rental properties to entice people to rent. So rent concession could be, if you sign a lease, you know, we'll give you 2 months free. This is just for discussion tonight, and then we'll bring it back on April 3rd for an official vote.
This is one of the things that may have caused the distinction between the asking market rate and the effective market rate in Peter's earlier slide. Right?
So when we discussed it at the Staff Housing Oversight Committee, we talked about, you know, how would you feel if we offered a 2-month rent concession? And we said, we asked staff specifically, how would you feel if the rent concession was offered to those signing new leases, but wasn't offered to those already in the building? And I think the responses from both our CSEA rep and our teacher rep was that's just part of renting, and that it's expected that those rent concessions, you got to move in first, but you know, so this is something that's offered to people that are signing up now. So it can be provided as 2 months of free rent or spread out over the term of the lease. Staff is suggesting, along with Wynn, that this be provided starting on April 4th if the board chooses to approve it, and then apply to 40 leases. So in discussions with Wynn, it's important to have a start and end point, because to be fair for fair housing is that it's not determined on who walks in the door. This is just what is offered no matter who walks in. This will not add a debt or be a financial burden on the property because these units were already slated to be empty. So the idea is that these would be generating 0 rent. So we're offering it as a concession to try to entice more people to sign a lease. And I think something I wanted to touch into is earlier when I was talking about how rents could be adjusted based on if the board chose to take out a COP. Those were very, very round numbers. This is more of a solid number. So I think as we're talking through things today, there's things that are round numbers, estimates, and guesses. This is actually something that's based in kind of what's happening right now.
Right, but just to be clear, that this is.
Your mic's not on.
This is just standard.
Yes.
Right, and it shouldn't be confused or even with the underlying issue here. The rents are too high, right?
That's correct.
And they're not even part of the same conversation.
No.
And that should be just very typical things. Renters do this, start off with.
Yes.
Or you move
this
in,
doesn't
and a year
solve.
later, then you have to pay for all the swimming pools and gyms and everything else. Right? Stuff like that.
This would potentially attract folks that are. I have a stable rental situation and don't want to make a change, or is that stability with like just their numbers? Right? It's like you're breaking your lease, right? Yeah, 2 months.
Yeah, and that's been thrown around before. in passing, we haven't even discussed it, but yeah. Do we pay for helping people break their lease to move in?
I mean, I think the way they pitched it was something like, you know, sign today and don't pay until June 30th, or, you know, something
Sure.
like that. And so I think it hits many teachers, having been in the field myself, their leases follow their contract, which starts July 1. So they often have leases that terminate if it's annual lease in the summer at some point. So this might encourage people who, you know, the incentive to break lease is not there. But instead they could go ahead and move in and not have to pay on their unit until the summertime. And the other thing they said was they could either limit it by time or limit it to a number of units. So if we're projecting, you know, maybe they want to get 10 more units filled. So it could be, you know, the first 10 units to go get that deal kind of thing, and then you cut it, and then you see if you need to continue it. Otherwise, as Dr. Westover was saying with the fair housing law, if we just left it open-ended, it could be problematic at some point, but that's not how the practice is carried out. It's usually very different.
Yeah, I'd be open to hearing other ways to.
I think
teachers
also, having a concession like this, there are a lot of long-term renters out there that qualify for, rent stabilization. And when you have a concession like this, they might be making it just fine, but coming up with the money to move is the issue, because you're having to pay for a deposit, you're having to pay for the last month of your current place and the first month of your next place. So this really makes it affordable for people to get out there and actually move location.
I was curious about the timing on them. When it's most beneficial for us to get some extra people in. Saying, you know, that a lot of times the teachers tend to have a lease that runs summer to summer. And so this would be kind of trying to get people in the spring, and then their lease is gonna end in the spring. To kind of like throw them off a little, but
As a
if
teacher,
that helps.
we're all over the place. Our leases are all over the place. We do not run off of a schedule of the school year. Some of us move at any given month, so it's everywhere.
Any other questions?
This comes with the NRA meeting.
That's right.
Okay, and then.
Yes, I think we're trying to be mindful of providing more time and space to kind of think through things.
I was gonna say, if you could, maybe it's in the agenda packet already. If there's a written summary of. sounds like
Yes,
it
it's
is in the
there.
agenda packet.
Yes.
Okay, great.
We're ready with it, yes.
It's ready.
And just to clarify that, the board would like to see this come under the action discussion section as opposed to the consent. Yes?
Yes.
Just going back to, I think what Christy was saying, I think as we're working through this, I think it's important for us to keep in mind that like, no matter what we do, this isn't going to be perfect for absolutely everyone, but like we want to give enough options that it will make sense for enough people to build, actually like change, deliver good outcomes.
That's one more question. Can you give a little more context on the 40? Where that recommendation comes?
I think that came from Wynn, yes?
Yes.
Yeah, Wynn, the property manager. But just listening to the comments, I'm wondering if it might make more sense to, at the next board meeting, go forward with 20. And then if it moves, then we can bring it back to the board and say, hey, we're looking at this being successful. Do we want to go further?
I don't want to hinder them in getting people onto the units. I'd
Okay.
rather, if 40 is the proposal, I'm comfortable with that, because if we're looking at trying to figure out a way to lower the rents overall anyways down the line, I don't think it hurts us to make sure that we're leasing up.
That's right.
If they fill 40 units within, you know, a month using that approach, I would have no problem.
We will bring that back next week, April 3rd. is a week.
Yeah. Something else that I wanted to ask a question about is, things like, not rent related, but, other costs like deposit and pet deposit, because those are also things that reflect on how affordable somebody feels like the space is. You know, if you move into a place and the rent is affordable for you, but you're having to pay an additional $75 for your pet and you have two of them, then it starts to shift the window of, is this really going to be an affordable space? So those are those other things, have we surveyed staff on how they feel about those extra items and whether or not those sway their decision at all? Because there are some places that rent that if you're a teacher, they will get rid of your deposit or considerably lower it.
Mm.
So those are concessions that already exist for teachers. And so if we are on par with that, that may also help us attract more.
That's actually a really good idea. I'm remembering back to when I was renting that I got a reduction in my deposit because I was a teacher. In terms for pet rent, I think we discussed pet rent with the housing committee and Devin, maybe you can help me remember a bill. I think we don't have pet rent. We have a pet deposit, but we decided not to do pet rent because Michelle actually on the committee was saying it's really difficult when, you know, you have a furry friend and you're paying extra every month. And so we decided not, are you remembering this, Bill? We decided not to have pet rent, but we did have a pet deposit from discussions with Wynn because sometimes there's more damage done when there's a pet in the apartment. But that's a good idea. We could survey and ask, you know, is a barrier the deposit? Because I think we trust all of our staff. I mean, they take care of our classrooms and our facilities. So I would be less concerned about the deposit.
Yeah, I would support that.
We'll find out some more information. All right, so winding up, wanted to put out there for other additional questions that didn't come up in any category that have just kind of crossed your mind. And then thinking about circling back to this idea of what are the success metrics? How will we measure them, right? Three are up there just as a reminder of what was put to you. Item, we want to fill all the available housing units. That would be a metric. We want this project, this building to become self-sufficient, right? And then the third one would be that this board of trustees meeting time would be allowed to be spent on really core topics like student learning, much more frequently.
You know, I would add one more measure of success. Leveraging off of what Peter said is to add something that associated with having new teachers. So he suggested Jefferson that 5 units set aside for teachers. I don't know what number that should be, but you know, I'd love to see 10. So because that really is one of our objectives. So you know, how we manage that to set aside units. What do we do?
Okay.
And we have to learn things.
We can more detail in there, right? Like we want to attract and retain teachers, so we should maybe be looking at teacher retention and then the total of the folks that are going through here, right? Like, are we helping us with other folks versus potentially get this and then something around how how we like the job for your stuff, I think is interesting to think like how do we measure that?
So some sort of retention metric.
Yeah, retention and attracting, how much has it helped us? Both of those things we can always talk about is balance.
Yes, there's very few stories. I think there's a couple old Mountain View Voice articles on BMR housing and teachers that are part of the district that have received it and that are still in the district because of it. I believe Mr. Franklin at Club is one of those cases where he says in the article that he would not, could still be here in this district were it not for BMR housing. And Mr. Franklin has been teacher of the year, and he's very beloved in the Bud community. But having more of those types of stories and publicizing them, I think, are important during this process.
If you have that, I will send it to trustees then, or send it to.
Yeah.
Staff data. That would be fine. I mean, I think there's a lot of opportunities, the rich data gathering and analysis here, right? So, when we say a metric, I think it's something that we have goals with them. And I don't know what our goals are yet. But maybe through talking about the workforce development through data, we might have some examples of what other districts have done or seen that we could base a goal on.
Yeah, I don't think we particularly prescriptive. I think these are general categories or anything set, but I think we should have something around retention and attraction. What, like right now, like zero information, it's like 2 teachers in their state office. It takes a while to figure that out, but like we can dial in on the actual numbers should be on that.
Well, and there's also the piece of it's such a separate thing that not every teacher gets tested, right? And so what are we seeing in terms of, I don't know that there's any correlation with who's in the housing, but that may complicate.
Sure. And I think I'd really like to see goals and targets. I'd really like to see those set. You know, just push us, and we should have those in order to align with, you know, with the purpose of the project and with our education objectives too. So all that, we might not know exactly what the numbers should be, but we should have some targets.
Can I ask a quick,
to try things out?
can I ask a quick question? So, because these two things I heard was this idea of a new teacher provision, I just jotted in my notes, right? And then also metrics around retention and attraction. Do you see those as living separately, or do you see those as living beneath the fill the housing unit? Because those are ways to achieve filling it, you could argue, but should they be separate?
Go to the filling housing, go to the filling housing. So I think what we're talking about is filling available housing units with as many certified staff as possible. Okay, I think.
I think that's a different, I think that's something that we need to discuss as our goal. I know in Jefferson, they have a 60-40 split, but that's because that's what their staff breakup is. And if that's a goal that we want to have, then we need to understand what the staff breakup is here, certificated versus classified. And if that's a goal that we want to share as well, or if we want to have a different type of split.
Anticipating the question, just so you know, it's 56-40 here.
Yeah, it's generally we want folks living here to be broadly represented. That's takes a lot of different jobs to help our people.
At Jefferson, the current state is 55 certificated, 45 classified, and their target is 60-40.
I was
So
actually
they're-
thinking
they're-
55-45 in
yeah.
my number for
Yeah,
here.
but they've got that target and they're continuing to push that way, but they're happy with the mix because as we were walking through, we were just hearing about this amazing community that's formed and building because it's such a diverse population.
The only thing that I would add on to how we calculate that ratio, if we set a goal on that ratio, is also looking at how our certificated staff are more likely to income qualified college. And so I think there would be a certain percentage of certificated staff who are just not going to qualify. And that should be exited from the ratio. So it should be qualifying, certificated, and classified, and figuring out our ratio there. Not all of our certificated, which some of them qualify. in the many years, this project has been around and under discussion. In the past, we had also talked about at some point possibly incentivizing certain, like maybe if one day all the units are full, incentivizing within the lottery or incentivizing, I'm not sure how, but certain positions that are hard to fill, like special education, staff, bus drivers, we compete with the bus drivers with not only BTA, but also Google and other big companies down here. They compete so much more. And our bus drivers need the same certification those bus drivers have. So it is extremely hard to hire bus drivers, even though we only need 6. We really struggle if we're down one. And so there might be other things down the line to look at, or maybe we set a goal around hard to hire positions, setting aside units for hard to hire positions, or something like that. So it's, while certificated and classified makes sense to me, I also think there's some complexity in which positions are also in the district that do have a significant impact, even though they might not certificate.
Yeah, maybe go back to the question about is this parallel to or subordinate to the other type. Retention and attraction. I view them as like separate, like they're orthogonal to each other, right? So I think just the filling it seems to be something to get us to self-sufficiency. We're having self-sufficient.
Right.
It's going to be empty. But those kind of pair together, whereas attraction and retention is more like, is this doing what we wanted to do?
I just showed Rebecca, I'm just hearing the conversation. I'm kind of reframing what I originally proposed here. I think we have some short-term interests and we have some longer-term interests in this, right? And I think what I proposed are the shorter-term interests, right? And I think the board definitely has longer-term interests in mind. In fact, much of what you're talking about are the longer-term interests of this project.
I think it's just, we want to make sure that we're not rushing to the bill.
Yes,
in
I'm
a
hearing
way
that.
Interferes with the broader.
Yeah.
Retention. Yeah.
Let me just put something out there. This is what I really would like to see certified staff moved into our programs. I recognize that other staff are very important and need housing. And I wonder that the city is, building a lot of BMR housing. I wonder if some of these staff would, our staff would have priorities in such as if we have some features. It's just something to thought, just something to throw out there.
So essentially asking the city for preference for school district employees.
Yeah.
BMR. I have no problem with that. I know they have done that some in the past because I worked with a teacher when I was teaching at Stevenson who got into an affordable housing home ownership opportunity in the city. But I think she had some preference. I don't think it's just the lottery.
I don't know. I would hope that the city gives priority.
It's got to be. I'm sure it's tied into fair housing law. So I don't know how much legal concern is there, but
It was, we had that when I was in Los Altos, in home ownership. And it was a priority, it was a set aside priority it was multiple categories though, right? It was like police, fire, teachers. There were a group of people, but I think we have half a dozen, 8 teachers in homes in Los Altos as a result of it.
That's something we can pursue with this specific project. I think it's more that maybe falls under kind of a broader housing strategy for employees, necessarily this building and what we want to fill it with.
Yeah. And I think, to that, I think it speaks to the idea that the idea of workforce housing is going to be addressed in a number of ways, right? It's a multi-pronged approach. This is a rental solution that we have. We're going to want to see if we can identify and help with some ownership solution. So it's not going to be solved with one project, obviously.
Yeah. And it would, yeah, be wonderful if you could sort of open up the discussion about, as a community, whether who owns and responsible for what BMR housing unit that we're working together, staff, all of the people who really keep the city going.
Switch gears.
Oh, well, I'll tie up on this topic and then we can carry on. That something when this, said this so many times, when the project was originally discussed, there was a partnership with Landed, the district had to do down payment, in fact, part it was down payment matching for mortgages for teachers and staff. And then those early discussions, this was when I was the board observer for the League of Women Voters, in the 27-2018 school year. What they had pitched was, this was when they were discussing building over it, was after about 7 years of renting in the district units, teachers could save up, or staff could save up about half a down payment based on the median home price then. I don't know that that's feasible anymore.
Right.
And then we had a partnership with Landed, district had a partnership with Landed, so that they could then move in. If we can, this is more of a long-term goal, but look at this as a pipeline to long-term home opportunities for our staff. I think that would also be really valuable, and it might be also by itching on some of those levers that you're talking about, Bill, around BMR units further throughout the city, not just rental, but ownership ones, and trying to get our people on the preference, what have you. There was discussion, at the federal level last year was so hopeful. That I have to say it was Butler who was bringing a bill that I don't entirely remember. It's been a while since I talked about it, but looking at the federal level, there was an attempt to get housing assistance for down payments for first-time homeowners, or maybe first during their families that own a home, and that could actually really help a lot of our staff as well. I think all of that is probably dead at the water right now. I can see that happening. Unfortunately, but that was also something that was out there in terms of trying.
Promises switching gears now.
I distracted you.
Yeah, so I think you have a good point that like making the safe pipeline to other stable housing situations, right? Because I think just by construction, it'd be 80% of left point. Folks a lot of them are going to start paying them better. They're going to have more money. It's unlikely to prevent people's forever homes, right? So we do want this kind of graduation. They'll have to invest and go back into money. We don't want them to go further. So how they like the strategy. Hopefully, like the savings on rent that they have, or the loans. They're not knowledge. Unless anything. I think for our metrics, right? So now that we've said we want these to be the short-term ones, I assume law will come back with a time bound for what this short-term looks like. Still available housing by way of what percentage and that kind of stuff. So we can see if we're getting those.
As I hear the conversation, I'm thinking that thank you. As I listen to the conversation, what's going through my mind now in terms of the short term is the second and third bullet, I think, make good sense. I'm not sure that the first one, the fill available housing units, is perfect for the short term, right? Because I think some of what was discussed here in terms of retention and attraction, and when you said Charles or Bill, the new teacher provision, right? those need to influence the first one, so I'm not sure. I think the second and third are good, but I'm not sure about the first.
I think there's a financial reality though, like we do have to cover whatever, we have to
Yeah.
know, right? So we are gonna have to a certain extent, fill units. I just, where that all is gonna go, we'll
Right.
figure out. But I also think there will be a recalibration of that once the units are filled. Like when everyone's in, it doesn't mean everyone who's in is gonna be there for the next 30 years. And I've always thought of this project not, and it's hard to conceptualize. We're only on the board for a brief time. People are only in the district for a brief time, but trying to think of this as a 5, 10, 15-year project. Just as I didn't necessarily anticipate, we have flexibility. We have to implement a waterfall provision. We have flexibility in that those, if we are bringing in people from other school districts or from the broader public that qualifies, they only get 2 years in the unit and then it turns over. So that might also be a release valve for this tension between short-term and long-term goals. In that if we set long-term goals that we don't know that we could fill all our units and meet those long-term goals right now, that is a pressure point of, well, let's put in teachers from another district who might be interested. And then if they only have 2 years tenure and then that unit opens back up for these long-term goals that we have. I'm not saying that's the way we have to go. I can imagine already somebody in the public saying, because I've been hearing it, this is just an affordable housing project that got sneaked onto the district's back. I don't think that's where we want to end up either. This is not intended for broader public housing. This is intended for our employees. But if we have long-term goals about that mix and how it works for us, that is possibly one of the levers.
Yeah, I'd say that's a separate discussion.
Yes, and to this point, right, like we're in the ramp up phase for this. Our metrics are going to be different. It's the short term versus when it's going to be. This is an ongoing concern that's running. Yes, I think to what you were saying, filling available housing units is a way to achieve self-sufficient on that,
Yeah,
but
the time.
it's not required. So I think having a goal self-sufficient. Obviously, much as I love to talk about housing stuff, time spent on student learning is an amazing goal.
The highest performing units, and we are not in that range right now. So if you want to look at that.
Hopping backwards again, final questions. I think I prefaced this a little bit. By the BMR agreement, you can't charge more than 30% of income as the rent. What other flexibility do you have? Can we charge over 30% income? Is that
No.
flat has to be there?
I don't believe so.
No, I don't think there's much flexibility there. I think the flexibility that we do have in terms of like what the maximum level of rent we can charge, we'll never hit that maximum level because even right now we are below the maximum amount that we can charge. So but I mean, that's the flexibility is there, but we won't utilize that.
Much more apparent to me some of the issues with just affordable housing policy in general. That jumped from 80% to 120% AMI is so significant that an 85%, a step under 85% AMI cannot pay for the same rent as somebody at 130%.
I think I mentioned earlier from the life cycle. I think this probably is not for the term that's about potentially for like when you have nonprofit housing corporation going. I said it's like I said earlier, it's not going to be perfect, but we should have a couple of different models for does this make sense for our family? What is teacher A is going to be 120% achieve their goals in the district, perform well, and is it satisfying their needs? They're missing bus drivers. What is that? What are those handful of people stories around?
Like pathways, right? I think it is like it's an employment and housing pathway. So everybody's gonna have their choose your own adventure. There are certain pathways that different employees will follow. And so I agree, let's think through what those pathways are so that we can support them as much as possible. Because I would hate for somebody to save up for a down payment and then go teach in Illinois because they can buy a house there, but they can't buy a house here.
I think embedded in the pathway idea is probably a recognition that it's going to be a pathway for as many people as possible, but it might not fit every person's situation.
Unless we have that kind of story in our heads, it's hard to make that thing work to really want to.
I think also to understand that this doesn't necessarily mean it has to be a pathway to home ownership here in Mountain View where purchasing is so ridiculous. It's the building of staff morale. And so if you've created a strong staff morale and you've allowed a teacher the opportunity to build their nest egg and they can move out, they're much more likely to make that commute because they've developed a good relationship with the district, their employer. If you look at neighboring districts that don't pay as much, who have higher teacher retention, that's part of the culture and the morale of the district. And so I think that's part of what this project could bring, is that strong sense of community to where, hey, if my commute changes from 3 miles to 30 miles, I'm okay with that because now I'm a homeowner, but I also love the place where I work.
You know, I think you said that well, and just sort of add to it is that I'm really not concerned spending time with us and because we've helped them get started. You always want good employees to succeed, and whether they succeed in art, we should be grateful they're here for 5 years. We've had them, they've taught our kids, and then they go somewhere else because they have to hold on. That's just, yeah, good people do that. It's sort of what you want good people. So that I don't see that as even part of anything we should. While they're here, which we really need.
Okay, well, hopefully.
Yeah.
If
And
if they start out in our rental housing and they build strong relationships with all of their colleagues, when they start to move through other life phases, they still want to stay connected with us.
Those people will move here because of the experiences. they have.
Moving classroom is hard.
Yeah.
It's a lot of equipment
Oh,
and
yeah.
years of built up acquisition of materials. So those who can avoid it, try to.
It's like a house.
Lots of some sugar. And I do think we want to, I mean, there's a splitting the difference between what the two of you said, right? Because we do invest a great deal in our employees, right? Not just talking workforce housing here, right? The time we've spent on their professional development and building their expertise. And we don't want that to be too poor.
We want our employees who start out as teachers here to go on to be administrators. Maybe they visit another district. Maybe they come back to be an interim superintendent when we really need one.
Stranger things. So where are we on the success metrics? Are the second and third ones acceptable?
Yeah, and I think at some point this has to get kicked back down to the housing committee. I do want to hear, like we have a current teacher and a former teacher on the board, but I want to actually hear from our union representatives on all of these things that we're talking about, because I think they have a completely different and very important perspective. And city representative has.
I think at a high level, is seeing plausible. Okay. We need more detail. This is
Well, I think it's gonna be, yes, and I think it's gonna be more detail on what we are doing and what milestones we have hit to achieve each of these.
Right, and you,
Right.
yeah, you just want to word it too, so that you're reinforcing the objectives of the project that the taxpayers really.
Yep.
Is attracting. Teachers.
Yep.
Of course.
I also, I just truly appreciate for taking the time and staff taking the time and Peter as well to have this discussion with us. I think, there was so much kind of running up to this launch of the housing that was about really the nitty gritty of development and that process that was hugely time consuming to get through. And that part is done now. But taking the time to really refine our thinking and our approach and how we're doing this, you know, I can always say, I wish there had been conversations like this earlier and more in depth, but I'm so glad we're doing it now and we have time to do it. This is not, there's nothing too late about what we're doing this. I think at the appropriate time to make sure as we execute the lease out that we're hitting. Do I wish we owned the land already? I never had to go through that whole process. Absolutely.
So as, I'll just say in terms of next steps, right, we'll have another, certainly on the April 3rd agenda, no surprise, we'll have an update to workforce housing. But we'll begin to frame that work and what we bring to around these metrics, success metrics, so we can demonstrate to the board and demonstrate to the public that we're moving forward on these, and this is how we're going to measure success.
Sounds like we are done with, sounds like we are done with action section item 3 and the workforce housing project. And we will take a 30-minute break before closed session. You want to do that? If
I'm
we
okay
can
to-
speed it up a little bit. Want to make sure that members of the public can move in.
Do we have an issue in that we set closed session as starting at 7? We don't usually say the time of the sessions. We did on here. Oh,
Artificial.
yeah. Is that- Go on.
Okay.
Switch.
Is it,
I'll have a group meeting.
is the closed session very long?
Sorry about that. We have some updates around negotiations that are going to be important.
Thank you. This is really good, helpful.
Sorry, I won't time the closed session next time.
Oh. I worked at Center for Shows.
I also have a question about like
Yeah.
the.
Jeff and they were also part
Of, like,
the project, but I connect you to him.
It might be a combination of the two.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like kind of the academic.
Okay,
Good at presenting to people.
that'd be great. I've been trying to figure out like who's the best person to grab, right?
So it's,
Yes.
yeah.
Okay, good. I did.
Oh, yeah, it is there.
Okay.
Sorry.
I was like, no, I didn't do it.
Yes.
The other person,
Ah,
so DCP. Has
So
been working with
prior
them a lot
to,
and.
So I'm great. How are you?
And this
Using our little like a different magnet.
I'm
to the
curious.
website,
Read about it.
And on the magnet, it showed like, these are excited for you to.
Casper,
Yeah.
that was on purpose.
Yes,
And then. drop them
it
in.
was. It was his.
That was like.
It was his want.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
You're not just doing it to do it, like.
Um,
I'm also free now, but I'm putting your things.
So impressive, like,
you know, we could talk.
Do you want to do that? Okay, we talked about that.
Similarly,
That's like
provided
same time tomorrow.
Right?
Like the
Oh,
changes in
that.
house, even after our secretary.
You
You
probably spoke on chocolate. You probably spoke on chocolate. What about? And you probably have the same. I keep talking.
Yeah.
I can, our state.
That's I know of at least one other.
They got from the city.
Similar to something.
Sounds like that.
Yeah. Yeah, just.
Yeah.
I can't figure out what was in our.
Yes, that's like.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah.
Yes.
Because we sent.
And then one.
And I.
And then one comes up.
Before this.
We still have
Even while I was.
increase at that level.
And I asked them. I
know.
assume.
All I hear is.
And then.
So.
Yeah.
Um,
Cupertino offers
Stop by
the same
there.
thing where
Oh.
you get all
I know.
Yeah.
but anyway.
Yeah, sure.
Just feel like. I don't really have
But that's what makes.
And so.
And then, you know, why did we can? You think it's very close there?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think they probably have their own.
Yeah.
Or what it, it's not like.
As soon as you open it, take it, drag it off, and it drops you in that bucket. Their mantra.
I believe several.
Yeah, I know, they're.
And they were able to spread.
Yeah. Oh,
Instead
yeah.
of all the
Couple
color.
of things, BMI.
I mean, what brings did they give us? Did they export?
Well,
A lot.
Yeah.
They- As long as you're within there,
Elephant gets
a portion.
Everybody walked it on.
Yeah.
And then stay there.
And like the house.
Yeah.
If you leave it there, you don't.
Rather than.
But,
Oh, that's,
just-
Yeah.
Yeah.
Reading it, I read all. That's
Yeah.
just my set down. And then trying to look at the
I-
documents.
Yeah. I've been trying to
We-
take notes because you know,
we-
because I
Yeah.
didn't expect that. And then like highlighting.
One way or
yeah,
another,
they'll read something.
both parties.
This is the first time I looked at the study session, wasn't that?
Because of our.
Yeah.
All the planners. Range and.
Correct.
And then.
Yeah, there's one other who's been around.
Yeah.
Maybe you're a few or something.
No.
And Rebecca.
Oh, I know that.
No.
There's one named Rebecca. Those three, I think.
Anyway, it's mind blowing.
So.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Why it's-
Well, I think it's, I mean, eventually, hopefully, this story is the structure of. Regardless of the whole. Here's how we made sense of something that.
So that has.
It wasn't wasn't that
What?
So do you know about the?
I just have a sense that.
And then,
They have a variation of it.
Yeah.
She's,
I've heard bits and pieces over the years.
I think she's,
Yeah.
so she's actually,
I, this,
You.
I'm better to.
the city is.
Back out.
That.
And then the chart.
But anyways.
So she's, yeah, so we're still.
You've been around, around all of this, but on the other side of the, on the other side of the.
Yeah.
I just want to.
Yes.
I'm not just double checking this class.
I'll send you.
So if they were gonna get this new with the voter.
No, they don't. It just- Yes, because this was created established on the 60 feet. It's like a redevelopment district. It's very real. It's different. It's a different, different animal. And they get, they.
You remember Bruce Mason? He wants to be a community with a very bad.
No, that's before, I played
And like.
2002. I don't think
Bruce. He's now.
Um,
5 years.
well,
ago.
we're trying.
He was, he told me, so he came to work in the city as a contractor. We were trying to get downtown plan back in the mid 2000s. So he and I kept it off and we walked with lunch together. He would tell me relatives from his mouth. One of the things he said that he felt best about was that he had helped the city figure out a way to wiggle through the labyrinth of ordinances and legislation and laws, find a way to lock down value of the shoreline. So he said some of the city council members were talking about, let's just sell it, get out of there. It's only just swamp and a dump. Why would we even?
So if we will be down to.
That's.
And he helped them sort of save weight.
No, so what you.
Right. Yeah.
So they
Yeah.
I sent him, I sent the
They have
article.
this access. to
We're-
information. It's not illegal.
He keeps referring to that.
Yeah.
And
So if you have a transportation.
so
You want to know.
that's something.
Regardless of the.
Yeah.
This is
Try to school them to go over there.
Okay.
I know.
Sebastian.
Right, but he was already,
He was here.
right.
He started- started-
I got one of those.
And he's there.
And it was like,
Yes.
had one at home, but I got that little garage sale and I'm like,
Very.
get it out. And then my kids want to say, fine, I can't let it ruin everything. Fine, but
Yeah.
And anyways.
We have it.
Yeah, and so that's, I'm seeing where it's.
That'd be-
Sort of stuff.
Yeah, I
Hey, you want to play tough?
I think that's, I'll ask you about it. I think that's, there was another, there were just not.
maybe we had.
And then Lonnie was gonna be teaching from director of the
Residents.
He's the director.
Yeah. There were other things there, but I thought.
And I'm.
And
also.
I got my- not-
Unfortunately, I feel very.
I know they like it, they like it,
Saying that.
Say what?
like they work for you.
Yeah.
It's not, they don't like full work. I was like, so, you're thinking it's actually Charles.
Yeah.
And he knows this, if there's any way to. A lot of people not.
Okay.
When I go to some live stream.
So.
Oh, yeah. No, 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 yeah.
Then sure.
I-
Or they give it to James.
I know, but
Yeah, I used to do runway shows. And then, I decided that. Sharing them out.
Oh, yes.
Very.
What am I gonna do? You're hiring. Why am I doing like 10 to like that? And he's trying so hard to try, I don't know. Yeah,
I wish.
I started in high school.
yeah, every time.
Let me.
Well, it absolutely not. I think part of it was,
Thank God, I appreciate it.
when I started in high school in the neighborhood that I grew up.
Yeah.
And so some of my oldest
Well-
student was 4 years old.
Okay, well, I
And I
bet
had students that were,
Yeah.
siblings to my peers. And so it.
Or even more.
No problem with them.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was rough. So then,
Devin.
Yes.
Then-
Because I can talk.
they can. They will turn.
I'm sure that it's.
So that.
Yeah.
But it's a deliberate.
Okay.
To change the volume up and
Oh,
down.
okay.
I don't.
But it
know
still
if
works with a lot of, because I mentor and.
I got
clubs.
Are you worried?
They have control on their own.
Yeah, I don't think it's an issue on mine.
No, so it's just asking.
I get
That worked for us.
Yeah, there's, on that tablet or whatever is over there, there's some, I think Shelley can.
The more,
Or maybe
when I
it's
go
on the
back.
wall, maybe it's the control on the wall text.
Okay, I mean.
Wait, it's one of them, but there's something to
I'm just trying to find
amplify.
my dad friend.
Should give you that.
It's comfortable, like they actually see me as an adult.
Okay, and that'll be.
And being not, no longer in the area.
That'll be recorded.
Oh, volume.
Yes.
One of them.
It's such a funky age and it takes the connection that I have with the schoolers. Yeah,
I'm just trying to figure out.
and that always is what I think keeps me at that age, is like, yeah, there's a lot of people, a lot more.
I tried.
Schoolers, but to.
So we're gonna miss it, but we're gonna see if it works.
Oh, hold on.
This is where there's a lot more people who do that.
You know, I have it,
Shelley-
but I'm
And
pretty
say,
shy,
the gamut
and
of
look
stuff.
at it, and I just buried it in my email, but I should pull it out.
Yeah, on the outside.
Or just send me even the date, where it was mailed to.
I just, your son.
Because I
I
tried to
have
cancel all
it.
since we did something.
Law and it's
But it's usually not, because we're here in the middle of it, you don't know.
And then August comes back and you get like a note or whatever. I attended a wedding.
That's.
That's one good one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, well, I don't know.
Invited
I have
them.
no idea. What's keep in contact?
So since I'm in the midst of educators, I'd like to negotiate.
What is this? Will you be on? Which one?
I did not, I wanted to say as a reminder, I can't.
Right.
So if you and your pal want to road this.
Okay,
Like tomorrow morning, say, make sure this gets back to us before we.
okay,
I'm willing to.
all right, good deal.
And I'm also thinking about activating a spreadsheet that I picked up at a certain office
Okay.
today. I want to set myself up so that anytime any of us have a, what if you did X? I can just.
Right.
So that's one of my goals for the weekend.
Okay.
It's very thoughtful. I'm just constantly amazed at how generous SRQ can be with their time and talent. So I show up And I just, like, yesterday was terrible, I was just a snotty mess. So I told her, don't go near me. And it turned out that Janice was on sick, because her kids gave her some. So the guy, Kyle, who works, he's an asset management guy. He gave me the option, the
Dress up
conference
and
room.
coordinate dancing and all that, oh, yeah.
Doing the swap. And somehow I just got onto the topic of travel and I mentioned South Africa. Oh, my screensaver has a leopard on.
Okay.
And so I took that picture of South Africa because I just got back from there. Turns out he did damn near the
Oh,
same
really?
photo safari as we
And
had.
those are.
So that was pretty cool. Yeah. You just never know what'll happen with you.
No, it's true. That's true.
Have all the other ones. So.
Really helpful
You don't
conversation.
put them on my roster, they're gonna buy their data by the
Yeah.
way.
Yes. Exactly. But I think more of them want to, so, yeah.
That everything.
Yeah. And the distinction of short term,
They're gonna find.
yeah, longer term. And
Just
then
how
the mix of all these things.
Yeah, so that's.
And I get access to the file.
That's part of it, that's where I am.
Whatever it is.
But,
That's good. And if it was really successful, we want to do another one, only to get it right this time. Right? Yeah,
That's a bomb.
yeah. Because I think Jefferson's
They
about.
still do, I have your pictures, they're still like all about the office, yeah.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Well, they can correct, right, set the stage for the next one.
Especially, but what I love about it. There's still. There's still. They're in the high school, so they start. But yeah.
I thought you were.
No.
Start, so.
That whole.
No wonder she
was
was.
Yeah.
This type stuff, and there are.
Brings us back. Oh, yeah. They used to do it, definitely interesting.
Wow, it's interesting.
Whereas in middle school, they're still.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I went up, I did a speed test center. College of Health. Oregon, the Ducks.
How you are?
Yeah, I'm a recovering duck. And one of the guys who's an attorney,
There are salads. Do you want something?
Oh,
Oh, sorry.
What?
Are they in here?
He's like holding, he likes to keep his blood.
No, I didn't see it. Wow.
Yeah, Brian, Jeff.
You have 9 minutes.
So I went to Jefferson Junior High, with Elisa.
Oh, is that, okay.
Yeah.
I remember you saying that you got to go somewhere with her.
Yeah, so I sort of, as she was rolling off the board, I'm like, you don't get to leave totally, right? Because I need somebody to help me get their corporation set up. And is she perfect or what?
She's.
Yeah.
Like she's just.
Yeah.
An incredible person. I wish she was still on the board of directors. I really do.
Yeah, I mean, they recruited some really competent, capable people to step in behind.
I mean, she said she felt comfortable.
Yeah,
leading,
yeah.
Right? So,
yeah.
but on the CSBA board of directors, where I got to do, we got to have kind of like the United Bay Area. Right? We have all kinds of regions within California, all kinds of perspectives.
I was trying to figure out.
So, you're a good buddy.
That would make sense if people.
She's a great mentor.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Incredible.
It's probably also.
Yeah, she's got a whole plate.
Yes, I know, but it's probably like. Yes, it's probably kind of. Tilted that way.
That makes sense.
And average it shakes out.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I just,
Yeah.
I don't want to.
Yeah.
Further away.
Turns out she was. I knew this stuff.
Because I know housing is kind of your.
Wasn't always there. She was up and around the corner, right? So she's virtually a neighbor.
Yes.
If I could walk over and knock on your door, I would every day.
Yeah.
She'd probably be my end, but-
Mine's over, sorry, I lost the microphone. I think we tried as best we could to talk the whole time. We got scheduled for 7.
You know.
Like in the grand scheme of things.
I'll let you know, I think it's gonna be down to me.
Yes, let me know, that'd be great. Just
Not.
Charles's mic could be 30% louder than everyone else. Have a good night. Bye.
That is a whole different, like the elbows are sharp
Oh, yeah.
in that arena in
Oh, yeah.
a way that I haven't seen. I mean, now school boards are starting to change a little bit.
Yeah.
It's like
It seems
more
like higher education, there's a lot more trauma.
Yeah, I think so.
No, I totally agree. I work for.
I think the one thing is-
Oh, you know. Yeah, there's I don't know if that's, you know. When it gets that ugly, then I like being the person on the outside shouting at them. I have more freedom.
Yeah.
That makes